In 2007, the Chinese government passed a law that literally requires Buddhist monks to fill out government paperwork before they are allowed to reincarnate. I know how that sounds. I know. You're already reaching for the comments to tell me I've lost my mind. But this is not a joke. This is not a metaphor. And this is not some obscure medieval document someone found in a basement. This is a regulation, Order Number 5, issued by China's State Administration for Religious Affairs on July 18, 2007, and it went into full legal effect on September the 1st of that same year. It is still in force today. The law is called the Measures on the Management of the Reincarnation of Living Buddhas in Tibetan Buddhism, and you can go look it up right now on the Congressional Executive Commission on China's official website, where the full translated text is archived. The law exists, it is real, and the deeper you go into it, the stranger it gets. Now, before we get into what this law actually does, I need to hit you with the part that stopped me cold when I first found this story, because the headline alone sounds insane. But here's the part nobody talks about. This law doesn't just regulate who can be reincarnated. It creates a framework where the Chinese Communist Party, a government that officially describes itself as atheist, has positioned itself as the final authority on the spiritual validity of Buddhist rebirth. A government that does not believe the soul exists has passed binding legislation controlling what happens to the soul after death. And to make it even more surreal, the enforcement mechanism for this law is not spiritual, it is bureaucratic. If a monk reincarnates without government approval, the reincarnation is declared, and I am quoting Article 7 directly here, illegal and invalid. The Chinese state can rule your reincarnation out of order. To understand why this law exists, you need to understand what a living Buddha actually is. In Tibetan Buddhism, certain highly realized spiritual masters are believed to consciously choose to be reborn, lifetime after lifetime, in order to continue their service to sentient beings. These reborn masters are called tulkus, and the most prominent among them hold the title of Rinpoche, meaning precious one. The most famous example you already know, the Dalai Lama. The current Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso, is recognized as the 14th reincarnation in his line, a lineage that stretches back to 1391. The process of identifying a new tulku is elaborate and ancient. After a living Buddha dies, senior monks search for a child, usually born around the time of the master's death, who displays signs of recognition, identifying objects belonging to the previous incarnation, recalling names, demonstrating spiritual qualities. This process has operated for over 600 years. It has never required a government permit. In Tibet, which China officially calls the Tibet Autonomous Region, there are approximately 1,000 recognized living Buddhas currently residing within Chinese territory, according to figures released by China's State Administration for Religious Affairs in August 2007. These are not minor religious functionaries. They are the spiritual anchors of Tibetan Buddhist communities. Teachers, leaders, the people communities organize their entire religious and cultural lives around. The Dalai Lama himself has been in exile in Dharamsala, India since 1959, when he fled following China's military crackdown on a Tibetan uprising. That exile, recognized by the Nobel Peace Prize Committee when they awarded him the Peace Prize in 1989, created a political rupture that has never healed. And it is that rupture, specifically, that is the direct engine behind the 2007 reincarnation law. To understand the law, you have to understand one specific child and what happened to him in 1995. May 14, 1995. The Dalai Lama, from exile in Dharamsala, announced that he had identified a 6-year-old boy named Gedhun Choki Nyima as the 11th reincarnation of the Panchen Lama. The Panchen Lama is the second most important figure in Tibetan Buddhism. The two roles are historically intertwined. Each traditionally plays a role in recognizing the reincarnation of the other. Within days of the Dalai Lama's announcement, Chinese authorities took Gedhun Choki Nyima and his family into custody. He was 6 years old. The Chinese government then conducted its own selection process, using an ancient Qing dynasty ceremony called the Golden Urn Lottery, a mechanism introduced by Emperor Qianlong in 1793, specifically to give the imperial court influence over reincarnation selections. documented by scholar Melvin Goldstein in his landmark History of Modern Tibet. In November 1995, China installed a different child, Gyaltsab Norbu, as the Panchen Lama it recognized. The UN has since described Gedhun Choki Nyima as one of the world's longest-held political prisoners. He has not been seen in public since 1995. The 1995 Panchen Lama crisis exposed something Beijing had not fully confronted before. The reincarnation selection process was a lever of enormous political power, and it was sitting entirely outside state control. Whoever controls the identification of the next Dalai Lama controls the future of Tibetan religious and cultural identity. The Dalai Lama was in exile, aging. He was born in 1935, and at some point, there would need to be a 15th. Beijing could not afford to let that selection happen on the Dalai Lama's terms or the Tibetan exile community's terms. The 2007 law was the formal legal answer to that problem. It codified what the government had done ad hoc in 1995 and turned it into standing policy with enforcement teeth. Xinhua, China's state news agency, framed the law at the time as a measure to protect normal religious order and to stop separatist forces from using reincarnation to meddle in Tibetan affairs. That framing tells you everything about what the law is actually designed to do. So here is how the law actually works in practice. Under the 2007 measures, any living Buddha who wishes to reincarnate must have the reincarnation application approved by the State Administration for Religious Affairs, or for lower-level tulkus, by provincial-level religious affairs bureaus. The application must include documentation of the living Buddha's lineage, the religious basis for the reincarnation, and, this is Article 6, verbatim, the candidates must demonstrate patriotism and must not be influenced by separatist forces. That phrase, separatist forces, is the legal language China uses to describe the Tibetan government in exile and the Dalai Lama's office in Dharamsala. So if the process of identifying a reincarnate child involves any input from the exiled religious community, which traditional Tibetan Buddhist practice would require, that automatically disqualifies the candidate under Chinese law. The state then has the authority to conduct or approve the final selection. Any reincarnation recognized without completing this process is declared legally void. What does enforcement look like? A monk or religious institution that recognizes an unapproved reincarnation is subject to legal penalties under Chinese religious affairs regulations, fines, closure of the institution, criminal charges in severe cases. The child identified as a reincarnate would not receive official registration as a living Buddha, meaning they cannot legally function in that religious role, cannot be educated as one, and would face institutional exclusion from official Tibetan Buddhist organizations within China. In practice, enforcement relies heavily on the state's control of monastic institutions. Monasteries in Tibet operate under registration requirements, and registered monasteries are subject to patriotic education campaigns, mandatory political indoctrination programs that require monks to denounce the Dalai Lama and affirm Chinese sovereignty over Tibet. Institutions that fail to comply risk losing their operating status. This creates a coercive environment in which the reincarnation law doesn't need to be prosecuted in court to have force. The surrounding infrastructure of control makes compliance the only viable path for monasteries that want to remain open. Let's talk about documented real-world application. The most prominent ongoing case is still Gedhun Choki Nyima, the boy identified as the Panchen Lama in 1995. Though he was taken into custody before the 2007 law existed, his case is what the 2007 law was built to prevent repeating, and it continues to be the live example the international community points to when assessing the law's implications. The UN Committee on the Rights of the Child raised his case in both its 2005 and 2013 concluding observations on China, demanding proof of life and access for independent monitors. China has repeatedly stated he is living a normal life as a private citizen and does not wish to be disturbed, but has never permitted independent verification. As of the filming of this video, Gedhun Choki Nyima would be in his mid-30s and has not been seen publicly since he was 6 years old. Meanwhile, China's approved Panchen Lama, Gyaltsab Norbu, has been promoted to Vice President of the Buddhist Association of China, a government-aligned body, and makes state-sanctioned appearances at official religious functions. Beyond the Panchen Lama case, The 2007 law has shaped how reincarnations of lower-profile tulkus are handled across Tibet. Human Rights Watch and the Congressional Executive Commission on China have documented a pattern in which monasteries are required to submit reincarnation candidates through state channels, and in which candidates who have received informal recognition from exile communities are rejected and replaced with state-approved selections. There have also been cases of monks facing detention after attempting to seek guidance on reincarnation matters from the Dalai Lama's office. Contact that, under the law's separatist forces language, can constitute a violation. The CECC's annual reports from 2008 through 2023 document ongoing enforcement actions against monasteries in the Tibet Autonomous Region and in Tibetan areas of Qinghai, Sichuan, and Yunnan provinces, regions with significant Tibetan Buddhist populations that are also subject to the law's jurisdiction. Now here is the twist, and I want you to really sit with this one, because it is the detail that breaks the brain even for people who already know this law exists. The Dalai Lama has said publicly, in a 2014 interview with the Financial Times and in multiple statements from his office, that he may choose to reincarnate outside of China, in a free country, specifically to deny Beijing the ability to control the selection of his successor. He has also said his reincarnation could be female. He has even suggested he might be the last Dalai Lama if the institution no longer serves its purpose. What this means is, the Chinese government passed a law to control a succession they have been legally preparing for, and the man they most need to control has structured the entire situation so their law may be irrelevant. Because the 2007 law applies within Chinese territory. If the 15th Dalai Lama is born in, say, India or Europe, and identified by the exile community, China can declare that reincarnation illegal and invalid all at once. And the hundreds of millions of Tibetan Buddhists worldwide who do not recognize Chinese religious authority will simply not care. China will have an official Dalai Lama, the world will have a different one, and a government that calls itself atheist will find itself in the middle of a theological dispute it created the legal framework for, but cannot actually resolve. If that didn't just rewire something in your brain, I don't know what will. A government that doesn't believe in the soul regulating what happens to the soul. A 6-year-old boy who has been a political prisoner for 3 decades because of a question about metaphysical identity. And a law so overreaching, it may ultimately be powerless against the very succession it was designed to control. This stuff is real. Every word of it. If you want more of this, facts so strange the truth sounds like fiction, hit subscribe and ring the bell. We drop these every week, and I promise you, the next one is just as unbelievable.